is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Doing great, man. It feels like it's been forever that we've been able to sit down and actually do a podcast like this. I just got done watching our string of podcasts that we recorded at EIC and then at Identiverse. I'll tell you what, they both feel like they were like a year ago. In that time, I've moved, I'm getting settled, or I should say I'm moving. I feel like moving just takes forever because you actually, when do you call it done?
I don't think you ever do, because I'm still finding boxes from 3 years ago when I moved from Chicago to North Carolina that, like, I don't know if I'll ever actually open that, but I don't know if I want to get rid of it.
Yeah. I mean, I found some boxes as I was moving, pictures from high school and stuff like that. It's like, you're not throwing those away. You only look at them when you move, but you can't actually put those in the trash can you?
Why don't you just auction it off to everyone?
Oh,
Don't look inside,
true.
just auction it off.
That's also an option. I guess while we got you here, Felix, let me go ahead and introduce you. So we've got Felix Gaehtgens. He's the former Gartner analyst. I feel like we're the kind of like the first stop for people who were at Gartner kind of moving on, and we're happy to have you on here.
Consider that a badge of honor, I guess.
Yeah. So before we're going to talk about machine identity, there's a couple of things Jim and I want to cover here. We've got some conferences coming up. Jim, you've been moving, and you're right. It's been like a couple of months since we've actually sat down in sort of like our sort of home studios. You're not back fully to your home studio, but I have to imagine that we're probably a couple weeks away from kind of having you back at full strength.
Yeah. I mean, as you watch, people who watch the show on YouTube, which, by the way, we put every episode out there on YouTube, you'll see my background evolve over time. I've got the old school fan behind me, the old school vertical blinds. I'm going to move to a different room, and it'll be much more like Jeff's background. And I don't think I'll ever achieve your background. I probably won't ever have a crisp, clear camera like you have, but, I can strive for such things.
Hey, squad goals, let's call it that for the podcast. We'll see. There's always green screens. There's so many different options. I've actually been thinking about kind of toying with my background a little bit. If had the same one, so if you're on YouTube, you can kind of see it's been the same for a while. I'll change up the lights, maybe the video playing behind me, kind of stuff like that. Maybe I'll start to throw like AI generated videos behind me. I created one of like a dog doing, DJing. Maybe I'll put that on a loop and have that behind me. And maybe that'll be kind of like an Easter egg for, people who kind of watch this on YouTube.
I think this is called refactoring. What you're doing.
Refactoring. Yes. It's okay to get smarter, right? We can always improve or try new things. And, if people don't like it, I can always change it. Or if I like it, screw you. I'm going to keep it and do what I like to do. It's my house.
Green screens are really not new for us because we used to do live streams, and the idea was let's put green screen behind and we'll try to have fancy backgrounds. And that was cool, but it was a lot of effort.
You need good lighting. You need a good green screen, and you need really good, solid lighting to pull off a good green screen effect. And, we've all seen like the bad ones where you have like that shimmer, kind of old Star Wars look of a Force ghost, in front of a camera, that kind of thing. But yeah, we'll continue to work on it. Let's jump into some of the conferences we got coming up, because I've been doing a couple different things, and I've got some more things coming up here. We've got the Cyber Risk Summit, so that's put on by the CRA, folks, same people who put on Identiverse. So I just did one in Raleigh a couple weeks ago, and that was kind of cool. I moderated a panel around incident response and sort of threat mitigations and things like that. So it was kind of cool. I'm going to be doing the same thing in Chicago and in Philadelphia in September. So we'll have on our homepage for idacpodcast.com, if you just scroll down, you'll see I've got some free passes. So anybody who's listening, they can register for that, and hopefully I'll see people in Chicago and Philadelphia for that. So that's cool. We've also got the Identiverse in DC that's taking place in November, I think it is. I'll be there. I don't think Jim, I'm not sure if you're going to be there yet or not, but right now
we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I mean, I really do love being out there interacting with practitioners, our people who are just like us. And so I'm going to try to make it out there, but it's been tough to travel with the move going on. But by November, I think things will be settled down. But you've been doing yeoman's work getting out there and representing the podcast, Jeff. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah, it's cool. And I dig it when people come up and, most people notice you because you're usually dressed in a very conspicuous way, some sort of jacket or cowboy attire or whatever it may be. And so people, I think, naturally gravitate to like, who the heck is this guy?
Why is he so different?
Right. So Identiverse. And then, we're going to be at Gartner again this year. So we've got kind of a cool session that we've been planning with our friend Rebecca over at Gartner. So we have a new game show that we're going to be working on. So it will probably debut at Gartner. We might do it at Identiverse to kind of, work through that as well. But right now it's called Majority Rules, and it has a lot of audience participation. So people will play along with us. And so we're still working out kind of the details exactly how we want to pull it off, but a new game show brought to you by Identity at the Center. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, I think the game shows have been a big hit, especially. It's one of those things where you want to see it in person. So I think we probably will debut it at Gartner, make it special for Gartner. But I think that one thing I wanted to throw out there about Gartner is that it's at the Gaylord in Grapevine, which is right near Dallas. It's a fantastic venue for families, so especially around in December. It's right around Christmas time, so you get to see all the decorations that they do, and they kind of set it up that way. So if you're thinking about going and thinking about bringing your family, I think it would be a great thing for young kids.
Yeah, it's kind of a resort style place. And for those wondering, we'll have a discount code. That's actually going to go live in October. So right now there's still early bird. You can register with that, or we'll have a discount code in October for people to use, and you'll find that on our website as well. So, okay. So we've kind of covered all that stuff. Let's talk machine identity. And Felix, I kind of introduced you before, and I'm always curious how people get into the world of identity and access management, or digital identity, or identity security, or whatever it is the heck we're calling the space that we're all in. So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into identity?
Well, I got into computers when I was 8 and into Unix when I was 17. Got my first email account through something called UUCP. I don't know if you guys even know what that is. You seem a little younger. But I then worked as a software developer, sysadmin, network engineer, database admin, all this kind of stuff. And I have a pretty deep technical background. In the 90s, I was connected to the internet. That was like absolutely awesome. You could see your packets go around the world in almost real time. And so I was on projects to build and operate ISPs, internet service providers. Eventually got into bigger projects and got the chance to work with telcos. And that's when I first heard about the term provisioning. And then later on, I slid into LDAP. And just as the term identity manager was making its way, I was the space with a virtual directory vendor called SimLabs. There were 4 commercial products then, and only one of them, Radiant Logic, is still around. All others got acquired. Anyway, when I first heard provisioning used for, enterprise provisioning, I thought it was a joke. Yeah, compared to the pretty elaborate and crazily difficult provisioning process that were used at telcos. But I, joined and stayed in the IM field for more than 2 decades, doing all kinds of things, and eventually working as an analyst for Cole, and then after a short hiatus at Gartner for 12 years. And now I'm currently on a career break, doing a lot of thinking and writing on machine IM.
Yeah, you've done a lot of LinkedIn posts recently around that, and I definitely want to get into, that's kind of the purpose for today's conversation is, all right, so Felix, you've been flooding the zone, so to speak, with like machine identity. Why is it top of mind for you right now? Is it just something that you think needs to be addressed? Is there something more to it? An infatuation? Sure. I go back the same way with you. I've been in computers since I can ever remember. The IBM was a PC Junior, was my first computer when we first brought it home, and the dual disk drives and cartridges and stuff like that. So
we were almost the same age then, I guess. All right, well, look, to understand the bigger story, we really have to zoom out a little bit. So here's what keeps me up at night. Every critical business process today runs on machine-to-machine interactions. So you have apps talking to services, services calling APIs, and now you've got AI agents in the mix as well. So the majority of your business is literally machines talking to machines, right? And we've gotten pretty good at managing human identities, usernames, passwords, multi-factor authentication, all that good stuff. But ask any IAM team how they're handling machine identities and just watch them squirm. Most are doing a terrible job. And, I understand why, let's emphasize a little bit here. I can count the exceptions, though, on one or maybe 2 hands. Uber is one of the few companies getting it right, and even they're still grinding away at it. And so I think the real problem that we need to solve is securing these machine-to-machine interactions. That's the game. That's what matters. They could try to solve this with NHI approaches, means more API keys, more service accounts, more static credentials, but that's just doubling down on the problem. You're creating more technical debt, not less. And so I think the breakthrough inside is really that modern machine-to-machine interaction. These interactions don't need these legacy identity constructs at all. We have better ways. The question isn't how do we manage NHIs better? It's how do we build secure machine interactions without them? And I think that's the conversation that every CISO should be having right now.
So I think this is super timely, and I guess at the risk of getting too confused, we have machine identity, we have NHI, we've heard workload identity. Like, these are all aren't these all just service accounts? Like, why do we have so many different names for this? And I guess why does machine identity, win in your mind compared to maybe something like NHI or workload identity, or maybe it's something else?
Sure. Look, I'll be blunt about NHI. There's a lot of hype. NHI is a hot buzzword, and buzzwords have this tendency to make background buzzing noise, which sounds like bzz, bzz, bzz. And yes, I'm spelling that exactly how it sounds. So when you dig into what people are actually talking about, it's those legacy artifacts every organization is drowning in: API keys, service accounts, static passwords, personal access tokens, right? It goes on and on. I call this what it is. It's technical debt. Sure, you need to find and manage what you've got today, but here's the bottom line. The goal isn't better NHI management. The goal is actually, or should be, to stop creating these things altogether. Use modern machine identity practices and don't just manage the problem, try to eliminate it as much as you can. So, while everyone's chasing the NHI buzzword, smart organizations are asking themselves, how do we build systems that don't need these legacy identity constructs in the first place? That's where the real conversation should be.
So Felix, Meryl, what's different about machine identities and human identities? What about them, about managing them, is different?
Okay, well, when people ask about human versus machine identity, I always start with a reality check, right? Because non-human isn't really just workload devices. You have a pet, that has a microchip probably in their ear. That's identity management too. There are legal identities, legal entities that also have identities. So the scope is really much bigger than people think. Now, when we talk about humans versus machines, let's first briefly talk about the similarities. Machines actually use some of the same technology that we use for humans in terms of IAM, especially OAuth for authentication and authorization. But now here's where it gets really interesting, because the differences between handling humans and machines are really game-changing. First of all, machines don't necessarily need accounts. Now let that sink in for a few seconds. Right? Think about it. When a container spins up, we create a new identity with it. The container terminates, the identity vanishes. Poof. No orphaned accounts cluttering your directory. And second, forget multi-factor authentication for machines, because they can't use MFA, right? So how do you secure them? Simple. Don't store credentials at all. Generate ephemeral one-time credentials on the fly when the machine starts up. And here is where it gets messy. Most organizations are doing this completely wrong, I think. They're treating machines like humans. They create accounts, assign an owner, store credentials in a vault, do quarterly attestations, and eventually decommission these accounts. That's backwards. The right way, in my opinion, is embed identity in the workload lifecycle itself. Workload starts, identity appears. Workload stops, poof, identity disappears. Automatic, clean, right? Stop assigning individual owners to workload identities. So why would you do that? Assign ownerships to applications, that makes much more sense. If you assign ownership to applications instead and make those owners groups, not individuals, even if it's a person, make it a group of one, that's not just cleaner. I think it's the only way it scales.
So with the distinction made between NHI and machine, it almost felt like they're synonyms, right? That's what I felt like. And it feels like within this whole space, there's so many different types of accounts that are machine accounts. You have everything from devices to workloads. And I
Right.
know you mentioned like, okay, let's handle business entity and things like that separately,
Sure.
but it kind of feels like within this space are things like service accounts and things like potentially API keys and things like that. Do you have a
Yes.
taxonomy in your mind in terms of what the buckets of different types of non-human accounts are? I'm thinking about it from a practitioner's perspective because
Right.
practitioners are trying to wrap their brains around this. Like, what do I need to care about? Is it the IoT devices on the manufacturing floor? Is it the thermostats? Or do I only need to
Right.
worry about service accounts and things that are workflow related, maybe device related? But as, answer that question if you would.
Sure. Yeah. So I would always start in the taxonomy. I would say we have machines, and machines can be devices that you can touch and workloads that are a piece of code. And you ask any computer science graduates, they'll tell you that a piece of code is a machine as well, right? So this probably all lives under machines. Now, what you mentioned are legacy constructs. API keys are terrible. Like friends don't let friends use API keys. I'm serious about this. An API key is like a piece of cash. You drop that, you drop that coin, anyone can pick it up and just use it to buy something else, right? Service accounts are terrible too because you create an account for something. Now you've got this piece of toxic sludge that you have to manage, right? So the much better way of doing these things is when you really focus on what does it take to enable secure machine-to-machine uh, communications. It's not like, do I use an API key or do I use a service account? It's like, well, let's try not to use these static constructs that come with all of these problems with it, but let's try to use modern dynamic identity constructs that shift the whole responsibility from managing static accounts and keys to managing policies, having the
Yeah,
identity live with the workload. Like you don't have to create the account for the workload. The workload starts, bang, it gets its identity dynamically, right? That's a much cleaner way to do it.
I definitely see, the kind of the modern IT doing some of these ephemeral
Oh
workloads
yeah,
and things like that. But Jeff knows this was kind of my favorite saying. We have one foot in the past, one in the future. So most of us practitioners are dealing with things that are not ephemeral, service accounts and things like that, that
yes,
have those same problems. And in fact, they very well may be the riskiest non-human accounts that we have.
yeah.
Kind of how do we deal with that from that same framework that you're talking about?
Okay, I see it. The $1 million question, right? How do we clean up this legacy? I'm already drowning in service account. What now, right? I get it. You've got legacy mess everywhere, but I do have a 3-step game plan for you. So the first thing is you need to stop the bleeding. Don't create any more of these things. And this is really important because the technology to do this right already exists in your environment. You just need to learn the modern patterns. I'm constantly posting about this stuff on LinkedIn because people need to see there are better ways. And the second thing is, yes, absolutely. You need to manage the mess that you already have. And sure, there are plenty of vendors selling workload identity management solutions, although they hype it up as NHI solutions. But here's what they won't tell you. These are band-aids, tactical fixes, right? They help you inventory and rotate your existing junk, but they don't get you off the junk, right? And this is exactly why the whole NHI narrative bugs me. Vendors are literally selling you better ways to manage bad practices and calling it strategic. It's not strategic. This is one big tactical piece of duct tape, right? Now, third, when you can migrate some of that legacy stuff to modern, dynamic, ephemeral identities, sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's impossible, right? So don't aim for perfection, but aim for no new technical debt. You'll always have some legacy stuff there. And the workload identity management vendors, the NHI vendors, will always have some value there, but don't try to create any more of it. And so the real win isn't cleaning up everything that you have. The real win, I think, is making sure you stop digging the hole deeper. Because legacy will always be with us, but it doesn't have to define our future.
I actually love that answer. I mean, that is the kind of sage advice that people should be looking at? You mentioned you post about this all the time, so give me a chance to kind of plug that. Where do you post about this?
I'm getting better at this, kind of going from being a Gartner analyst to just kind of writing myself. It's totally different way of writing. I do post on LinkedIn. I'm wondering whether I should post my articles on Medium as well, or maybe create an own website. My struggle right now is I can go pretty deep on this. I can go pretty deep in the weeds, and sometimes you have to do this because otherwise people think you're just kind of spreading some kind of gospel. You're not really ready to back it up with hard facts. But then again, when you dive too deep, you're also kind of losing people. So I can try and kind of find my way in between. And I think how I do it right now is I do publish some higher level things. I also publish some things that are much more in the weeds, like the stuff yesterday that I published on Kubernetes. That's a little bit more in the weeds. And I do have some friends who help me peer review this stuff. You know who you are if you're listening to this. Thanks a lot. It's helped. It made them so much better. And yeah, if you'd like maybe to offer me some help by peer reviewing some things that I have in the works, be happy to do that too.
Okay, Felix. So it sounds like people can go out, follow you on LinkedIn, follow your journey, see your blog posts. I wanted to switch topics a little bit because,
Sure.
again, kind of what you're talking about is like, how do you make this so that you don't lose people? Same thing from my perspective, or from me and Jeff, is like we fight for the practitioner. We want to make sure that there's a framework to build from, no matter where you are in your journey of understanding identity. And so at a real basic level, we started with the question of what's the difference between managing machines and people. And now I want to think about it from the perspective of what are the buckets of managing identity? Is it lifecycle management, authentication? In your mind, what are the things that a practitioner needs to think about when he or she is thinking about managing those buckets?
Okay, gotcha. So I think I would love to talk to I'd love to talk about what I call the Swiss Army knife for managing machine identities. And again, the real objective is to secure machine-to-machine interactions, right? That's what we're trying to do. Whether it's cleaning up after legacy constructs or doing it properly, this is really the main objective. Now, if you make this just about NHI, you're accepting the use of a legacy static identity model that's full of problems, and you're slapping on the band-aids to make some of those problems less painful, but not really solving the issue. So if you want to secure machine-to-machine interactions, here's how you should go about it, right? First of all, you should understand where your stakeholders are, and we're IMers. We know this stuff. We should know this stuff, right? This is critical. And we know this from other areas. If you don't involve them, then you're effectively just trying to clean up after your kids, right? And once, the stakeholders, bring them together in a working group and collect the requirements. What are they doing? Writing applications, scripts, AI agents, other types of automations. And I'll get to the Swiss Army knife, right? Define what your Swiss Army knife for modern machine IAM will look like. By the way, modern machine IAM, that's not really an official concept. I say machine IAM because for me it makes sense. We talk about customer IAM, you might talk about workload IAM. So I think machine IAM is just like a perfect continuation, especially because you look at CIAM and machine IAM, so customer IAM, machine IAM, they use a lot of the same standards. Like OAuth is like heavily involved in both, right? But anyway, didn't want to distract too much. So you're going to need different technology. And luckily, you likely already possess quite a few of them. You don't necessarily have to buy that much. So the Swiss Army knife will, for sure, also contain workload identity management tools, or the so-called NHI vendors, right? Or there may be some discovery tools that you may already have through your PAM products. You also need some ways to bootstrap identities for workloads. In other words, give the workload a credential from nothing, kind of instantiate it out of nothing when the workload starts up. And I think SPIFFE, SPIFFE, the Secure Production Identity framework for everyone, is very well positioned to fill that gap. Plus, you need a working OAuth stack. Ideally one, and only one, but possibly different from the IDP that you use for human users, because you have some IDPs that are much better positions to work, much better position to work with API use cases, right? You're going to need API gateways. You probably already have them, right? You need authorization frameworks, either Open Policy Agent or Authzen or CEDAR, and any of that. So the good news is that much of this is already there. You can need PKI as well. Solid PKI infrastructure is required to bridge trust between different organizations. And you might think about getting a separate certificate lifecycle manager because enterprise certificate lifecycle managers are kind of a little expensive to use them for ephemeral certificates that just live a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
And also, there are a ton of other things in there. Don't forget service meshes for that virtual network layer with tight authorization controls. And observability, you need to think about that as well. So make sure that every log message that you have has identifiers that you can trace from start to finish, right?
Yeah, one thing I've seen in the real world is organizations kind of investing in the key management infrastructure for network access control, being able to use certificates on devices, mobile devices, laptops,
Yes.
things like that to
Yeah.
drive network access control. Putting your analyst hat on, I mean,
Oh dear, been a while.
I just imagine this is an analyst call, right? You talked about a lot of things that are emerging standards, and a lot of time, the way you're seeing in this NHI space is a lot of vendors coming to the fold to solve these problems. And when I talk to practitioners, they want to get more out of the investments they've made already. They're willing to go out and acquire a technology if that's the right move, but they need a framework for thinking about how far can I get with my existing investment, maybe in a platform. I'm not going to name names, but we all know what the platforms are, versus where do I go out and acquire a fit for purpose product that maybe has promise of doing more down the road, but IT shifting under our feet. You'd see new problems, you'd see new vendors, you see new standards. How far can I get with my existing platforms?
You need to expand your horizon a little bit because it's not just the classical IAM tools that are of interest over here, but it's also the tools that are used by other parts of the IT organization. I mean, but if you're in the IAM team, do you actually manage the public key infrastructure of your organization? Maybe you don't, but someone will for sure. They've got those tools out there to do that. If you do you manage the AWS or Azure assets or Google Cloud assets? Probably not, but you will probably find people that have some secrets managers and use some secret managers within those platforms, right? You probably have some parts of your organization that are deploying applications in Kubernetes, and so they might be running Kubernetes secrets, right? Maybe some of them are using service meshes as well. They might have Istio or Linkerd or maybe Consul or something like that. There are DevOps people that are using maybe GitHub secrets, which aren't really great. I don't really like that too much because it's, again, the old NHI problem. It's static credentials. But, the question is always, at the end of the day, right, most organizations, they have mature process for many of those buckets. But when you ask the IAM team about helping you to manage this better, securing your workload to workload into actions better, you know what you get? You're going to get crickets, right? Imagine that, someone calling the IAM team saying, you know what, I've got this script. I need to talk to the database every night and clean up some things. I don't really have a secure way to store any credentials. What should I do? What kind of answer are they going to get? You see, that's where the IAM team is not really involved. And I think that's why we need to solve this in a much better way, in a more holistic way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. And so let's start with the question I'm leading toward with this leading question is, who should own this, right? I see this space called identity security evolving. And when I talk to vendors that have identity security products, I think to myself, that's not IAM. Sure, there's identity baked into the solution, but there's already a team that does that. And then I wonder to myself, so does IAM need to evolve? Does the IAM team need to evolve to take that part of things?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna stop there. It looks like you have an answer, but I do have a follow-up question to this. Okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah. All right. So, who's responsible for machine identity? Now, here's the brutal truth: it's everyone's job, right? Which means it's kind of no one's job. Right? This is kind of what it ends up to. But look at the stakeholder. We have security teams, sysadmins, developers, application teams, DevOps, infrastructure folks, and yeah, theoretically, the IAM team should be leading this. They're used to herding cats and getting multiple groups aligned on identity initiatives already, but here's what's really happening. IAM teams are missing in action from these conversations. Right? I've been talking to CISOs for 2 years about machine identity, and guess who's not in the room? The IAM folks. Now that should terrify us. You want to know why? Pictures, as I mentioned, you're an infrastructure engineer. You've got this piece of code that you're writing that needs access to some kind of API. You need secure programmatic credentials, and you don't really have a secure way to store them. So you call the IAM team and ask, how do you get this? How do I do this right? What do you get? Crickets. Good luck in getting an answer. And that's the gap right there. Traditional IAM teams, they know human identity inside out, but ask them about ephemeral workload credentials or dynamic machine authentication, you get blank scares. They'll say, service account? No, that's not the right answer. Right? So here's what needs to happen. You need to form this machine IAM working group and get all the stakeholders talking together. Get all the stakeholders in one room. I think IAM is a pretty good situation to lead that because they do have the coordination skill. But if they won't step up, someone else needs to grab that wheel then. Because right now, we've got critical infrastructure being secured by whoever happens to be close to the keyboard. And that's not a strategy. That's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, I think that's what I've seen working with clients over the years is that the organization, let's call it the developers. I don't want to pick on any one group, but the organization has moved forward with cloud infrastructure like Amazon, AWS, and like all of a sudden you've got this whole big, and I'm probably dating myself a little bit, but this is what I've seen over the past 5 years, maybe 5 years back, where you start to see IAM is starting to realize that there's all this cloud infrastructure that their tools aren't managing any of the identities, and there's all this automation. They're rolling, ephemeral infrastructure and workloads out.
Yes.
And the identity team doesn't have a role in it at all. Now, I never recommend being the department that slows down the progress, right? This is something that the business is doing because of good reason, but you have to have control over it. You have to have a set of controls over it, right? It can't be the Wild West in terms of, because developers, I've worked with developers a lot over the years, and, they want to make sure things work and then get the security right. They don't want to try to start with the right security and then have security stop them along the way. And then sometimes what happens is the priorities shift to something else and the security never gets cleaned, like the app gets rolled or the infrastructure, something gets rolled out and then something else takes priority, security never gets cleaned up. And that's where you have the big openings where, the identity team is to be tracking on that, has to be aware, has to make sure that at the bare minimum that policies are being applied and being adhered to. But it's the next level of, if you don't provide some automation, some management of all this, it's too much to do it manually. There has to be an automation side to it as well, right?
Yeah, it's gonna flame out for sure. Now you mentioned a few great points. Let me see if I can still remember all of them. But I think one of them that you mentioned, the way that I understood it, is that IAM teams aren't really that often talking to developers or aren't really quite familiar, even comfortable with kind of constructs that developers use. And that's a problem, because if you're an IAM team that is disconnected from your stakeholders, then you've got a problem. And if you think, hey, uh, I'm an IAM, this is more of a business discipline. Well, machine-to-machine interactions drive every critical business problem. So if this is not a business problem, then what is, right? So I think this is the big disconnect. And of course, look at many IAM teams. Many of them don't really have a lot of development experience, but there might be someone who does. Maybe someone like me, or maybe somebody from a development team who understands something about identity. That's why it's so important to get this working group together, so that you can really look at the individual use cases. You can find the best practical solutions. Because when you're saying, how do they actually secure these things? This is not really that difficult. The technology is already out there. The frameworks are out there. The libraries are out there. But if you're not going to tell them how to do it right, they're just going to look on the net and, take one example and whatever works for them. Heck, they're going to use an API. It's not their problem, right? But if you tell them, you're maybe programming in Node, and, we've got our IDP here. So use, for example, passport.js, and then you do this type of interaction. Don't use client IDs and client secrets, but maybe use something like Spiffy, which you can, by the way, get for free in your Kubernetes and all of that kind of thing, or use MTLS, which is also usually enabled out of the box. This way, you really make the whole thing dynamic, and you don't have to clean up after the kids anymore, because you don't have these static credentials anymore. This is really important, I think, for IAM teams to figure out, we're being sidelined. We're maybe just doing our IGA and our SSO, but there's like this whole world out here that does identity, and we're not involved. It's pretty scary, actually. And I'm trying to rally people into understanding this a little bit better and getting involved, because I think it's critical.
I think you covered the strategy for a lot of this. You talked about the frameworks. You talked about kind of that, strategically speaking, that leap from you have your foot in the past, you have to kind of deal with that to some extent.
Yeah.
I talked about
NHI
this
stuff,
situation, which is very common, which is that the development side of the organization is running at full speed, and identity, in many cases, has kind of discovered, like, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff, and now we have to manage it. Do you have in your mind kind of a tactical approach of like how, what you would say to a practitioner, like if you are discovering this now, you've got this big machine account problem, if you want to be the leader, because I think one of the things you said is if nobody's problem is everybody's problem, but somebody has to like step up and be the leader. That's usually, Jeff and I talk about it as like the IAM program manager. If you're the IAM program manager, what do you do today? What are the steps that you follow to try to get this under control?
So the first thing that you should do, if you're actually tasked to do that, because in the conversations that I've had in the last few years, IAM was nowhere at the table. Sometimes it was just the CISO talking directly to someone and say, go clean this up. And what they then did was they kind of looked at NHI and they cleaned up that mess. And while they cleaned up that mess, they produced more and more and more of a mess. So it was kind of like this vicious circle, right? But if you really want to solve it, then let's try to think about solving it together, because it's not the IAM team's responsibility to clean up after everyone, right? It's perhaps the IAM team's responsibility to be the visionary there and to provide good guidance on this. So get the stakeholders involved, right? Find all the use cases, define the right integration patterns for securing machine-to-machine interactions. And then first thing is try not to, it could either be the first, it could be 1A or 1B, but you kind of got to do two things at the same time, right? I would say try not to create any more of this junk, right? Use better patterns and design your Swiss Army knife so that you can do it. The second thing is, honor what you have and try to clean it up. And that's where these workload identity management tools or NHI tools come in as well, to kind of help you clean up the mess that you already have. But you want to reduce that mess. You don't want to continue doing the same kind of thing again. And then the third thing is the second thing is really to provide that guidance. It's not enough to just put in policies like, oh, well, you shouldn't store a credential in clear text. Well, yeah, if you do that, then people are just going to default to maybe Kubernetes secret. They won't store it in their code, but they're going to store it somewhere else where it's not adequately protected. So you really have to give them that guidance, that cookbook, like do this, do that. And I'm trying to write a little bit about that on my articles. There's also ton of documentation out there already to do it right. And I'll send you some links afterwards if you want to post them with that thing. The third thing is to make sure that you can move from the old legacy practices to more modern practices, which means reduce your legacy, right, and build up your modern stack and shift some stuff over from here to there. That is over time, and there's obviously some legacy that you're never going to get rid of. So this is kind of good news for the NHI vendors. You're always going to need them. It's just you're not going to need them as much as they think you're going to need them, right? And then the last thing is to provide observability, because with all of these interactions, you got to know when, where, why, from where, all of these kinds of things. And you need to do this by ensuring that you can correlate all of your log messages from the instantiation of an identity to some kind of transaction that was done, even though the token was already exchanged multiple times. You had several actors in the middle, especially for agentic AI. That is really important. So these kinds of steps are there. The IM team, I think, is a very important contributor. Could even take a leading position, but it's not the one that is going to do all of these things. But you're the influencer here as the IM team. If you don't rally your other troops together and solve this with them, someone else is going to take the wheel and do it for you, and you're just going to be at best informed, because they're going to see you like the legacy team. Oh, they're the ones that do IGA. They understand nothing about modern identity construct. Let them do their thing. You don't want to end up in that position either, because that's kind of what's starting to happen.
So I want to go back to something I think I heard you just say, is that NHI vendors, and we might not need them, or something along those lines. So I was like, whoa, hold on a second, because I feel like NHI has such a hot market buzz right now, and there's a ton of vendors that are positing themselves as NHI things. So help me understand kind of that viewpoint that you just expressed there around we might not need. First of all, did I hear that correctly? And then two, get into that a little more detail.
NHI is this huge buzzword, but the ones that are driving this are what I would call workload identity management vendors. I mean, they have perpetual roadshows. They invest millions in hyping up this market, and they do something that's very useful. They help you identify all of your legacy static identity constructs, because otherwise you don't know where they are. If you don't know where they are, how can you actually secure them? And then they help you manage that technology debt, which is something that's really important. I think it's tactical, right? Because strategically, you shouldn't be creating any more technology debt, but you will always have some of this, right? I think it's unrealistic to assume that you're going to get rid of everything. That's like saying you're going to get rid of your Active Directory, domain service. Eventually, maybe, and we might still be working when that happens, or maybe not, right? So I think you're always going to need them, because if something just kind of creeps in your identity system that was not adequately done, something that's not some kind of dynamic identity construct, then you need to find it. And for those things that are static legacy constructs, you need to manage them by managing their life cycle, by finding owners, by doing attestation, all of this tedious stuff that you don't have to do with dynamic service identities. But for that legacy stuff, you will still need them. I'm just saying, you'll probably always need them, just like you always need your Active Directories. They're not the strategic solution. They're one component in a bigger puzzle. And I think over time, if you do things right, they're going to be less important than the other stuff. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. So, Felix, we've been doing this podcast for 6 years. We definitely just celebrated 6 years. I think this is going to be episode 365, which
Whoa!
I think that's an important number, right? There's 365 days in a year.
Indeed.
That means you have now an episode for every day of the year, if you so choose.
So you can celebrate New Year's with me. Do you want me to tell you a little bit how the future is going to look like now that we're entering a new
Well, I would love that, especially if you give me some stock tips. If you know where things are going, maybe you can just tell us all where Bitcoin is going. But Here's what I was going to say is like I mentioned earlier, Jeff and I make it our mission. We kind of fight for the practitioner. We do this
Yeah.
podcast for the practitioner,
Yeah.
and we also I think the growth of the podcast is like more and more people follow it because you get educated, and we focus on the education. We also try to make it entertaining. So
Right.
to make this episode entertaining, I'm going to throw something at you, which
Oh,
I
dear.
think is kind of funny about non-human identities, not necessarily machine identities. I don't think people would argue that this is a machine identity topic, but non-human for sure, which is animals. So there's this
Right.
controversy happening about whether or not animals have identities, which to me is kind of like a tongue-in-cheek argument to say,
Mm.
I think most people probably come from the standpoint of like, no, they don't have identities. My personal opinion is it depends on the context, but you're our guest, you're our expert here in non-human identities. What say you?
And just to interject, my opinion is that anything can have an identity. It doesn't matter if it's human or non-human, or let's call it life form or non-life form based identity.
Everything that is distinct from each other has an identity. So think about it. You got two cats from the same litter, right? They look identical, but you can tell them apart, right? That's because each of them has their own unique identity, and you can use identifiers and attributes to describe what makes them different, right? Maybe this one has a slightly bushier tail than the other one, right? And by the way, the same thing with machines. Launch two containers from identical images, you get two exact copies of the same service, but they're still different IP addresses, different container IDs. So you can describe what makes them unique. You have to find their identities. And that's, I think, where people get confused. An account is not the same as an identity. And an account is just a registry entry on a system for a particular identity, right? So, yeah, your cats don't share a food bowl label. Why should your container share static credentials? This is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, and the opinion I feel like I've formed is that pets, for example, would have identities, right? If Jeff's dogs, he has 3 dogs, I believe. They each have specific identities.
Down to 2.
Sorry.
Sorry.
You have 2. All right. I'm sorry. I got that wrong. The 2 dogs go to the veterinarian. To them, they're individual identities. If you have a stockyard, they're more or less quote unquote inventory. I hate thinking about it that way, but I think how's that different than having, some inventory in a warehouse? You don't think that Amazon considers identities for every piece of inventory that they have, do you? Even if they have some kind of RFID chip in them. All right, Jeff, you got a look on your face. You go ahead.
Well, I mean, not to be too, Orwellian around it. I think we're all inventory of some degree. So, let's go back to the pet thing real quick. So I have 2 dogs. They are chipped, so there is an identity associated with them. There is also GPS collars, fitness trackers, right? These are my kids, basically. So there are sub-accounts for the identities of those things that are wearing around their neck or the, embedded in their shoulders or whatever it may be. So I don't think it's any different than, me who has my own identity, and I have multiple forms of identity. I have both credentials, like from the government. I have a phone, which has an identity of its own, but is also associated with me. I have a ring, a watch, a tablet. If I'm, cattle in a stockyard, yes, unfortunately, that's probably like inventory in that context. But I would bet that there's, in addition to just, the chip that might be associated with, that particular cow, for example, there are probably other devices that are being used that are maybe associated with some of those other life forms. So I don't know. I get into this kind of exploding universe of anything can have an identity, but not everything needs an account.
Absolutely. I really think that, static accounts are so passé. They're like such a thing of the past. We really shouldn't be using them.
That's so 2024.
No, it's so 2015 maybe even. I mean, really, I have my home lab, and I don't use service accounts at all unless I absolutely have to, right? And even then I try to get rid of them. It's actually possible. But still, I think there's this big confusion between what's an identity and what is an identifier and what is an account. Identities, I like to see an identity more as something philosophical. So your cats have identities. If you have two almost identical twins, they still have their own identities. Now, identifiers are what we use to describe something that has an identity, right? And we can use one identifier or even multiple identifiers to describe that identity. So, in the case of your smartphone, you have an IMEI, which is the number. It's kind of like the identity of the device, and then you also have, I forgot what this other number is. So if your SIM card, right, your subscriber number, I think it's called the IMSI, right? So you already have two identifiers, and the combination of that says this is Jeff's phone and it's Jeff's phone number as well. It's Jeff's phone containing Jeff's phone number, right? And then we can create, if you need an account, usually you would as at a telco, you probably would need an account for that. You create an account that specifies these identifiers and then uses them in order to provide services to Jeff. So I think it's important that we really understand the difference between identifier, an identity, an account, and a credential. Now with NHI, it's a sloppy term. They just throw everything together. So you never know, are they talking about credentials, accounts, identifiers? It's not really quite clear. It's kind of like this anything goes kind of thing.
Well, I think the other thing too, another is we also have to agree on definitions, I think, of some of these things, because I think we're guilty as an industry a lot of conflating definitions between two different things. And, we go back and forth, and a lot of it based on context and things like that. So I think, well, I've been listening, and I'm right there with you, Felix. I think there's so much more to have a conversation around this. I know we're running a little bit short on time here, but real quickly, like, where do you see machine identity going? Like, what's your prediction here for the next couple years, 3, 5 years, maybe even longer, if you've thought that far ahead?
Okay, so where is all of this going? So first of all, I'm seeing massive CISO attention right now. Finally, right? They're realizing machine identity is their biggest blind spot. But again, here's the problem. Most organizations are making rookie mistakes right out of the gate. They're going all in on the NHI vendor story rather than building solid machine IL foundation. This is kind of like you got perpetual heartburn. So you're popping antacids all day instead of changing your diet. This is not the right approach to fix it. But here's the catalyst that's actually changing everything right now. It's agentic AI. These things are forcing organizations to confront machine identity because agents are workloads from day one, right? You can't sling around static credentials when you've got AI agents spinning up and down dynamically. Well, I guess you could at your very own risk, right? So the big shift I'm seeing, we're moving from how do we manage more credentials or more NHIs to how do we manage trust and authorization policies. And that's the only approach that really scales. And market-wise, it's fascinating. So the workload identity vendors are making tons of noise, and they, of course, do useful things, but they're just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The real game changer is technology like OAuth, which we all have, which we all use, right? MTLS, which we probably use, would probably also have, and Spiffy, which you can get. It's not a problem. Probably you might even have it, might not use it. That lets you bootstrap trust for workloads like without all of that credential baggage, right? And don't sleep on service meshes either, like Istio, Linkerd, and Console. They're already solving workload-to-workload authentication, coarse grain authorization at the network layer. Now, secrets management also isn't disappearing, but it's also becoming less critical. But what I'm excited about are policy engines, tools that let you define which workloads can talk to what and exactly what they can do. Because traditional RBAC won't cut it at machine scale. So I think those attribute-based access control vendors, or you can call it the asterisk back, which is like all this buzzword thing happening there as well. I think they're going to have a renaissance with this as well. And the holy grail, like if you were to do a startup right now, I would be really impressed if you created a tool that actually helped you migrate from the legacy static constructs to more modern dynamic IAM, right? Ephemeral identities, just-in-time access, just enough privilege. There's some vendors who are doing part of this, like Aimbit and Access now. They're starting to tackle this migration challenge, but it's a fairly proprietary approach. And so the vendors that evolve from better credential management to dynamic workload trust, those are the ones who are going to really own this space, I think.
So I think that's a great call to action, because we have a lot of vendors who listen to this episode. established.
I don't have anything to sell to you at this point in
one's
time,
in
but
stealth,
if whoever wants to take
like,
this, yeah,
they may be in stealth, they may be out there, but there are a lot of vendors. I think this is
they might pop
skating
up.
to where the puck is going to be is always
Right.
kind of the right way to do it. I want to start to wrap things up here, and I want to stay with the, we got really deep, right? Submerged in machine identity. And so that's my terrible segue to talk about scuba diving. Because I think you mentioned in a previous call that we had, we were kind of prepping for this, was that you've done some scuba diving. And so I'm curious, like, how long have you been scuba diving? I've never done it myself. I don't know if Jim has either. But what is, what should I know maybe as a first time attempt at scuba diving, and what's been your most memorable dive?
Well, don't hold your breath. That's the important part. And when you go down, clear your nose, clear the pressure on your sinuses. It's actually a very safe thing to do if you respect the environment and you keep your limits. Now, the one thing that the analogy that I like to use, or I've been diving in since the 90s. I don't even know which year it was. It's like 1996. I can show you my certification card and you'll laugh because I'm like a 20-year-old guy with ponytail and all of that. You're like, what is this? And so I must have been diving at least more than 1,000 times. What I noticed though, when I did all my recreational diving, and then when I moved to where I'm living right now in Spain on the beautiful island of Tenerife, is it actually gets pretty deep there pretty quickly. So I mean, the waterline kind of goes down like this, and it's very interesting down there. But pretty deep. Like you have some reefs that start at, I'm metric, 40 meters, 45 meters. That's beyond the reach of recreational diving. So if you want to dive these depths, you have to learn how to do it securely and properly. And I think there's this great analogy to how we should do dynamic service identities, or even DevOps, where we run much faster, and we need to have all of those protocols and all of those procedures that allow us to do that. For example, in recreational diving, you leave usually a fourth of your tank, as a reserve, and when you're kind of reaching that, you kind of come back up. If you're doing technical diving, that's you have a ceiling. Like you can't pop up just like that. You have to potentially decompress. You get all of the nitrogen out of your system. So you need to plan for that. You have totally different ways of calculating how much air you need, how many tanks you're going to take. You plan for yourself and for your buddy. What if your buddy loses a tank? What if you have everything double? So there's in the last year, I've really studied machine IAM, and I kind of came from the same background. I thought I knew all of this. Oh yeah, we use service accounts. We got to rotate credential. We do that through PAM. Then we've got secrets managers. I had to unlearn all of that stuff and to actually see how it's done properly. And I think that is something that most IAM folks will either need to go through or need to work with these folks that understand this, to really amplify and relearn how IAM is actually done through an organization. Because a lot of people are doing IAM, not just the IAM team, right?
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of shadow IAM taking place in organizations for sure.
Yeah, and stuff where the IAM team is just not interested, or they don't care. That's why they don't get involved. So this is a really huge area and an important area.
Jim, I don't think you've been scuba diving, have you?
I haven't scuba dived, but non-human identities is giving me a case of the bends.
There you go.
That was my joke for the day.
There you go. We better recompress you.
It was so funny. I forgot to laugh. No, I haven't, but I have gone snorkeling. It's somewhat close. And, I think it's fantastic. I mean, the first time I did it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been going my whole life and I've never done this. So what you really want to do, there's a great coral reef off the coast of Cancun. I went snorkeling there. Ultimately, I want to go to Australia. So we have listeners in Australia. Jeff and I would love to come visit your continent, your country, and go to a conference and bring the Identity at the Center podcast. Just saying, reach out to us. And this is a serious offer. I would love to bring the podcast to Australia someday. But circling around the reef, you see you get a good view. It's like watching it on TV, but in real life, it's amazing. How about you, Jeff?
Where, yeah, but yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a water person, so I can swim and I've done that stuff. I'm just not a. I always say I'm not a freshwater, seawater kind of person. I'm more of a pool or something a little more controlled. Call me a baby. That's fine. I'm an indoor cat. I do think it's interesting though, because it's probably the closest thing to going to space that we have without going to space, because it's very similar, right? It's a different gravity level. Obviously, oxygen is a big part of that. A large percentage of the world has not been even mapped, right, effectively, or like explored, like all the deep sea stuff. So it's super interesting and super cool. I don't know if I have the guts. I would actually go to space before I would go, undersea.
Well, but you train for being an astronaut by scuba diving, because you kind of have to get your feel for the dimensions.
I would scuba dive in that giant NASA pool. That's probably the way I would look at it.
All right.
What can I say? I don't know. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap it up there for this week. Felix, I feel like we only scratched the surface of machine identity, and there's so much more. You got a lot of really good work that you've been putting out there, especially on LinkedIn and stuff like that. So we'll have your LinkedIn profile in our show notes for people to check out. Hopefully people will read, comment, engage with those discussions you've kind of started around there. But I really appreciate you taking the time with us, and happy that we were able to get you on here, on the podcast. I know we've got some other folks at Gartner who kind of listen. So the door is always open. People are always welcome to kind of come in and share their thoughts, and I appreciate you spending time with us. So we'll leave it there for this week. You can find us on the web, idacpodcast.com. Like, subscribe, do all that cool stuff that helps us grow the channel and get great guests like Felix. So thanks everybody for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.